My joints hurt. I'll take the rain. No, it's killing me.
If it's like warm and rainy?
I have arthritis. And this
Oh no.
the actual worst.
Does warm rain do the same thing, or is it just like when it's cold?
No, just like when it's cold and rainy.
Like humid rain would be okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tropical.
I just want like a nice like humid like April showers.
Yeah, that summer rain.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So let's have the daily conversation about weather. We're going to have a low of 28 overnight. The temperature at the beginning of lab is supposed to be 36 tomorrow. It is supposed to rain in the early morning hours. I do not feel compelled to drag you out in that kind of weather. One, because we have to wrap wires around plants with our cold hands. We have 100 models to put out, so that means we're going to be out there probably most, if not all, of the period. And I am fine with putting it off. I've built into the schedule. There's wiggle room built into the lab schedule because this is the last lab project that we're doing. We have wiggle room because I know that spring is fickle, is a fickle beast here. Except that we don't have enough time to get it all done in an hour. So I'm fine with that. But what I do want to ask you is, Emily came to see me yesterday, and she came to see me about her literature review, which is due when? I don't remember the date. I would have to go look it up. Hopefully you guys are paying closer attention to it than I am. My guess is the only reason that Emily came to see me and the rest of you haven't is that maybe she's the only one working on hers.
I'm struggling.
Okay.
I'm struggling.
All right. I just want to put that back on your radar if it's fallen off your radar. I realize it's an assignment that we made the second week of class, and it has probably fallen off of your radar to one degree or another. But get on that. Emily's question to me was, how many sources are enough? And you'll notice in the assignment there isn't a list of the number of sources, if I'm recalling the assignment correctly. But it's because each person's topic is going to be different. Who has mating systems in frogs and toads? People have been noticing differences in mating systems of frogs and toads since at least the 1950s, and I would say probably since the 1890s. So it's a very old field of study and field of thought. What has changed about that area of study is kind of how we think about those mating systems. So the first thing that happened is kind of with the modern evolutionary synthesis of the 1960s, 50s, and 60s. You had people changing the way they thought about those differences in mating systems in frogs and toads from just kind of curiosities about the diversity of it to then asking themselves, how could these different systems, mating systems in frogs and toads have evolved? How would natural selection have shaped these? And then there was a lot of work done in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. But then with the rise of molecular biology, we're now able to, instead of just looking at the mating system and looking at the overt behavior, we can actually say, okay, well, it looks like that frog mated with that female. Well, did that frog actually sire all of the offspring of that female? Or did some other frog sneak in and sire some of those offspring? So now we have genetic tools with which we can address these questions about mating systems, their efficacy, and their evolution, because we now have greater insight, because we now have molecular tools to, for example, determine paternity. So Elizabeth has a much longer history of research, and that research has undergone a couple of fundamental changes over time. I don't know how many papers she's going to need to talk about all of that with me. Emily's paper deals with behavioral syndromes, this idea of animal personalities that they mentioned at the end of the competition chapter. And there's this idea that these inter-individual variations are repeatable, such that there are some individuals in a population of spiders, for example, it would be considered bold. And boldness is a frequently researched personality trait. Well, there are characteristics of what it means to be bold. If you're bold, you tend to approach predators more closely. I think I talked about this in class at some point. You tend to approach predators more closely to get food. You tend to be less afraid of new novel objects in your environment. You tend to have larger territories because you're bold, because you defend territories better than less bold individuals, et cetera, et cetera. And so as I was talking through this with her, I said, the one thing that we don't see in these kinds of studies of personality is we don't see, for example, physiological correlates that might help explain these differences in behavior. Because within a population of fish, for example, or for spiders that matter, you may have fast fish and fast spiders and slow fish and slow spiders. And maybe the fast fish can approach the predator more closely because it has a good assessment of what its speed is, and it knows that it can escape the predator at that close proximity, whereas a slow fish can't, and so it doesn't approach the predator as easily. Maybe being fast also makes you less afraid of new objects in your environment, because if the new object is not dangerous, it's not a big deal, but if that new object is dangerous, you have to get away from it. And once again, if you can escape quickly, you can go and investigate that thing, whereas if you're slowpoke, you might not want to investigate that thing because you know if it is dangerous, you might not be able to get away from it, whatever it is. Same thing with territory size. Maybe individuals who are faster can patrol a territory more effectively because it can move more quickly to all the outer lying points of the territory. And as a result of that speed, it might actually be capable of maintaining bigger territories because of its speed. And so one of the criticisms that has been leveled against these suites of behavioral traits that have come to be known as animal personalities or behavioral syndromes, they don't take into account what other things might be responsible for these observed behaviors. And Emily was kind of looking at me like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And so then I was like, okay, well, you have 20 papers that you're reading. Because you have a kind of surprised look on your face, that either tells me that you haven't read those 20 papers carefully enough, because this is not an idea that is unique to me. It's not original to me. Or you haven't read some papers that you need to read. So for her 20 papers, that might not be sufficient because she hasn't run across this set of criticisms of this particular idea. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but you have a question that you have to answer as part of this literature review, whatever your topic was, and you need to do as much as you need to do to kind of address whatever that topic is. She also asked me about structure, and she's like, how am I supposed to structure it? I'm like, well, you're supposed to structure it in a way that makes sense to you and hopefully will make sense to me. And so I put a structure of kind of how I would write her paper if I was writing her paper. I'm like, this is one structure. It's not necessarily the best structure. It's not necessarily a structure that resonates with you. It's a structure that resonates with me because I'm the one who came up with the structure. But you do need to find a way of structuring the material that you have. It's impossible to know how you would structure that until you've actually delved into literature. So hopefully you have been getting literature and been reading that literature. If you haven't started gathering the literature and reading the literature, you have a lot of work to do in the next couple of weeks. So just put that back on your radar, close proximity radar, because it's coming up, and if you've been putting it off, stop putting it off at this point. So that said, tomorrow, if we don't meet to go out in the bitter cold and put out caterpillars that are certainly not going to be attacked in the first 24 hours, and maybe not for the rest of next week, depending on how the weather goes. The weather forecast keeps fluctuating. They were projecting much colder temperatures for the coming week a few days ago than they're currently projecting. So once again, we're in this fickle time. If you guys want, I can also be available tomorrow during lab time to talk to you about your literature reviews if you're at the point where I can be helpful in helping you through the process of preparing for that. If not, I will just do something else with that time. I've got papers to grade and applied stats, et cetera, but I can be available. So over the course of the next 50 minutes or so, think about that. Yeah.
Can you be available anyway to help me with my podcast?
Yeah, I can be available for that. Sure. So I'll just see you at 10:45 then? Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. Yeah, it's fine with me. Um, Speaking of Elizabeth, Elizabeth has to do what on Friday?
Lead discussion.
You have to lead discussion on McClintock and Ewitts. We've talked a little bit about that system when we were going through talking about sexual selection, because this is a system that involves sexual selection. I've added a couple of things to the April 1st materials. I've added a paper by Stratton. You don't have to read that paper, but you might want to flip through that paper and look at her phylogeny for the genus Schizocosa. So in the McClintock and Ewitts paper, there's a phylogeny for the genus Schizocosa, and there is a phylogeny in Stratton for the genus Schizocosa, and you're going to see that those two phylogenies are very different. That might be important as you think about what your future directions discussion is going to be at the end of your literature summary. On the topic of literature summaries, I have both your last exam graded and your literature summaries graded, and I'll give them back to you at the end of class today. They're better than the last time because everybody was in the B range, and now there are people in the A range and the B range, so they look fine. Yeah. um, yeah, yeah, they're fine. What else do I need to bring you up to date on? Oh, we're a little bit ahead. So because I couldn't be here on Monday, I made a screencast, and by the time I kind of got towards the end of what I thought was an appropriate time to make you watch a video, I was like, oh, I only have 3 more slides to go, so I just kind of finished it off. So what I want to do today is basically go through and clarify and answer any questions that you have on this. So we are basically right here. So we were going to be talking about this last part of sexual selection. One of the things about a screencast is you can cover much more material because I don't ask you any questions and you don't give me any answers. So we're a little bit ahead. So if we need to take some time dealing with sexual selection, we can. And then after we're done with that, we'll move on to parental conflict and family conflict after that, which is what the next chapter is about. The next chapter is about parental care and how providing parental care is divvied up among males and females, and also how there develops conflict both between parents in terms of who's going to provide parental care, and also conflict among parents and offspring in them delivering that parental care. And there can also be conflict between siblings in the pursuit of that parental care. So that's kind of what the next chapter is about. So we were supposed to collect caterpillars this week, but we will not collect caterpillars. We're supposed to do data analysis next week in lab. What we will do is we will deploy them, assuming it doesn't snow again next Thursday. I can just actually, what's that?
I said, no, that's not Easter. Never mind.
Yeah, so let me just move deploy caterpillars to that week just to keep myself straight, and I will move collect caterpillars to that week, which means that we will then analyze data that week, which means that we will then have the lab report do this. So you already know about aposematism. You've already read Brody's paper. You've read Brody and Jansen's paper. So you already have some knowledge about aposematism. So since we're putting off the date at which We're going to be analyzing the data because we're putting off the date at which we're going to be deploying the caterpillars. My advice to you also would be to start writing the introduction for this paper now rather than at some later time. You can also start working on the methods section for that paper now rather than putting it off until the last week of classes, because you also have a literature summary due that same week. So start working on those things. You know how we have built the caterpillars. You know that we're going to deploy them at the old golf course, assuming that Williamsville College still owns the old golf course. They've been trying to sell it. They haven't gotten any takers as far as I know yet. We've talked about how it's going to be analyzed. It's going to be analyzed with simple chi-square tests, looking at the expected versus observed numbers of attacks. So you, in theory, could start writing the introduction and the method section for this paper at any moment in reality. So once again, maybe put some time in on that now so that you're less pressured at the end of the semester, because whether or not cooperating with us. So yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Is the applied stats final in person?
No, that's a report.
Okay, that's what I thought.
That's a report. Yeah, I put this on both of my schedules just so that it's always in front of me when I need to show up for the exam.
I thought it was just a report, but then I was like,
Yeah, it's just a report. It'll be due on that day, but we're not going to meet. You're going to turn in the report, and then I'm going to read them and try and get them all graded by the end of finals week.
I was like, my flight doesn't get back from Virginia till like 10 p.m. the day before, so
That's fine.
might be a little.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, and I don't need them at 8 on that day. I can get them the end of the day that day. I just don't want to get them on Friday, because then I have to read 12, what is going to be a multi-page report over the weekend to get grades turned in. So this is one of those times when I'm glad that the final is earlier in the week, because it gives me some time to get things graded. I hate Friday exams also. The only thing that is not graded for you guys in this class right now is your vigilance lab report, which that's the next thing on my grading list to get done. So questions about all that? Now, if it snows next week, we're going to pretty much just have to put the caterpillars out, because we're just, at this point, we've used up all the wiggle room that we have. So we will just have to bundle up in our winter gear in April and go out and put caterpillars in the field. We might have to leave them out a little longer if it continues to stay cold, if we do deploy them next week, but we'll just, I hope winter just finally leaves us and we don't have to talk about it every Wednesday in this class. Yes, I'm sure. I am sure that was the reason. All right. So that's the schedule. Let's see.
So wait, did we confirm that we're not meeting tomorrow then at all?
I'm meeting with her.
Yeah, unless you come in. But like,
Yeah, if you guys want to talk to me about your literature reviews, then email me and I'll give you a time after I'm done with her. If not, guess what? You have a 3-hour block of time tomorrow when you can do what? You can work on your literature review. So use that time wisely. We're not working on caterpillars. You might as well sit down and get some work done on your literature review. She is Queen Librarian. So
I didn't know they used the library.
she can help you.
I didn't know they had an online thing until like a few weeks ago.
She can help you. She can help you.
Yeah, just like good research.
She even knows the website.
Not right now.
No.
Hopefully we told you about this in E&E, and you should have revisited this in other classes that you've taken in biology.
I can't remember what it was.
I think your class is the only class we went to.
Look what I have on my list of bookmarks. The first bookmark in my list of bookmarks is the library. Go to Library Home.
Stomach Hub.
Whoa, page not found. It's the old link.
Oh.
What is it?
Library burned down.
That was kind of a bad flex.
All right, so go to Research Services. You can go to databases by title or databases by subject. My advice is go to databases by subject.
If you have a specific article that you're looking for, you go to the journal search.
Yeah, you can go to Journal Search. One of the things that you will find is after you start getting into an area, you will become familiar with the people who do work in that area. So you can do searches on the basis of author. You can do searches on the basis of your topic. You need to choose your search terms appropriately and carefully so you don't just get this flood of everything, most of which is not really useful to you. I tend to use, do we still have it? No, we don't have it. What would be a good science one for biology?
I just use ProQuest Central for a lot of things.
Okay.
Academic search also they'll have like a lot of articles you're looking for. But also if you like go back to the library homepage,
You can also just do a general search from there and it will do
you
all
just search
databases.
for, like, your terms.
So you could do search,
If you go back to like your first
my first tab. My first tab.
career library services.
Where does it say career library services? Oh, there it is. Oh, tab. Oh, tab.
If you search your like search terms in the one that says like find books, yeah.
Yeah, right here.
Search your terms there, it'll come up.
This is a really
So Emily's doing behavioral syndromes, and so hopefully it will give us something about behavioral syndromes. How plasticity shapes behavioral syndromes. This is a type of WASP with personalities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can search this by academic journals, so you can filter out books and popular articles, et cetera, so that you only get primary literature being returned.
If you
And
find something on that list that says request through ILL, freaking Google it first.
That's
A
what I
lot
was
of
gonna
times
do
they're on
anyways, to be
Google.
honest.
so
If they're on Google and open access, then I have to send it to you like that, and just
yeah,
it's pointless. Like just Google it.
Google it.
Is that the
Google
one
it.
that Laura gave us?
Yeah.
That like barely ever worked for me for whatever reason.
It was finicky, but like once you reloaded it multiple times, and if you used the DOI number, it was 100%.
Oh yeah,
I'm very
So one of the things you can do is you can always go in Google, just put in the title of the article, and it'll do a text match, and it will produce that. But other things that you have available to you is you can actually, if you're familiar with an author, and you want to just say, okay, well, maybe I'm not getting all of the articles that he or she might write, you can oftentimes go to the person's actual webpage at whatever college or university they're at. Oftentimes on their lab website, they will actually have a list of publications. And in many cases, that list of publications will sometimes, okay, he doesn't, but many times you'll have a list that has links to PDFs of all of their publications. So in this case, he doesn't, but he has all of his papers, and so you could search through his papers. You could also, in theory, go to his, if he has a ResearchGate page.
I don't really understand why we have to like ask for access. Like, why can't I just make it free access?
Because publishers are
But, like,
in the business of making money. So some of his stuff is available on ResearchGate, mainly because his co-authors have put things on ResearchGate. So in many cases, you can actually just get the article from ResearchGate. Yes. Yes. Yeah, and in theory, ResearchGate is supposed to check that, but they don't in many cases. If you're So this is Ray Huey's personal website at University of Washington. He's retired now, but um, he still maintains his website. In all of these, you can almost always go and get the original article. He has them all scanned in as PDFs. So they're I'm going to tell you a story, and the story is going to be about how old and curmudgeonly Dr. Klinsky is. But when I was doing my first research project as a senior in my undergraduate career, you had to make an appointment with the reference librarian. And we had a reference librarian for the sciences, and we had a reference librarian for the humanities. And what you did is you sat down and you talked to this person for like 45 minutes or an hour, telling this person about your project. And in that time, she worked to put together a set of search terms that would be good in running an internet search. And then she sent you away, and she went into a room somewhere and said, she sent you away and said, come back in a week. And then she went into a room where she searched a database that was on our mainframe computer that was a database of it's called biological abstracts. I don't even know if they have biological abstracts anymore. But biological abstracts basically was a publication that gathered up all of the literature that was published in biology in each year. And they were published in volumes. And you could go to the volume and you could find the title, the journal, and an abstract of it. But then they computerized this, but back then it was all stored on mainframes. And so you would come back a week later and she just gave you a stack of paper. And it was those wide sheets. You probably don't remember this. Wide sheets of computer paper. It had holes in the edge so that it could spool through the printer. Had white lines and green lines, white line, green line, and it was all connected. So if you pulled it out, it would go from here to the end of the football field. It was all connected. And then what's that? They were perforated so you could tear them apart. Yep.
My grandma had that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. And then what you would do, she would give you this big stack of papers, and then you would just go through it, and you would cross through all the ones that weren't relevant, because there were lots of them that were not relevant. And you would keep the ones that were relevant, you would tear off the ones that were relevant, and you would throw the rest of it in the trash. And then at that point, you knew that there was an article that you wanted, so then you went to the stacks to get the hard paper copy, the bound version of that journal. You would pull it out, you would turn to those pages in the journal, you would make a photocopy of it, and you would take it home.
I could never.
You could never. Yes, you could. Yes, you could. All of us did. So you have so much better access to the literature than we did back in the day. And so you should take advantage of resources at the library, like Elizabeth, who knows how to go about searching for stuff, and also just the library's website, which gains you a lot of access. But don't just rely on the library's website. If there's a paper that you really want, and you don't want to wait for interlibrary loan to get it to you, do a Google search for it. Search for that person on ResearchGate, search for that person at their home institution, and see if there's a quicker and easier way of gaining access to it as well. There are multiple approaches to getting at the literature that you're looking for. That's my once a year cheerleading cheer for the library. Sure, no problem. You're going to pursue library science as a career. Yeah. Librarians are necessary components of any academic institution, and having a library is a good thing. When the library was clearing out its stacks years ago, they were going to get rid of a lot of the hard copies of a lot of the journals, and I went and gathered up all those journals and brought them to the biochem library so that they wouldn't leave campus and just go into a shredder somewhere or be burned or whatever. So yeah, the library website. I need to update my tab, my bookmark. All right. So What questions do you have about the last part of the chapter on sexual selection? Did that all make relatively good sense to you? Do you have any questions about that? I'm sensing a resounding silence. You guys know, you now know what simulparis and iteroparis is. Did you guys run across that in plant bio?
I don't think so. I read it in a paper for my research.
Okay, yeah. So simulparity is when you live your life, you don't reproduce, you reproduce at the very end of your life, and then you die right after that. A lot of plant species do that, actually, as it turns out. Fewer animal species have that particular pattern of reproduction, but that is certainly the case. Uh, I guess it is like a dandelion. Although, well, I guess, all right, yeah, because it's an annual plant. Yes, so I guess in theory, all annual plants are that way. So it is much more common in plants than it is in animals, but this was an example, Antechinus stewarti, which is an example of a simulparous mammal from Australia.
I guess I was a little confused on like the male. Like I guess they only reproduce once as well, but like do they just die?
Well, that's the thing about males, because males can produce a large number of gametes and they're energetically cheap. You can produce a lot of them. So I think what happens with males is they're capable of mating with multiple females, but they only have one breeding season that they are active during. The thing about females is they only have one batch of eggs during that breeding season that they can devote to reproduction. So they're both simulparous in that they live to adulthood and then they have one breeding season. In the case of males, that may mean multiple mating opportunities, but for females, it's just the one breeding opportunity. And she can also breed with multiple males, but she's only going to produce one set of eggs.
Yeah.
And that's how they then take advantage of that. They breed the female to either 3 breeding attempts by the same male or 3 breeding attempts. Each male gets an attempt, so from 3 different males. And that was kind of the basis of that experiment, to kind of ask the question of, does male quality matter? Do males impart differences in fitness to their offspring? And might that be one of the reasons why females would engage in mating with multiple males? And the reason that they do it is because it increases the chances of them stumbling into a male of high quality. Other questions? Oh, that's McClintock and Ewitts. So McClintock and Ewitts, they have this very simple, low taxon-rich phylogeny, and Stratton's paper has a much more comprehensive phylogeny. And so you will want to look at least at her phylogeny and where the species that are here are placed on this phylogeny, because this is clearly a much more complete, much better filled out phylogeny than this one, which is the one that is in your paper. So that is something that you'll want to do as you are writing your literature summary. But I'm trying to get the parental care to come up. There we go. Okay. So, parental care and family conflicts. Your parents have raised you. All you guys have parents, right? I'm assuming. Your parents have raised you. They've sent you off to college. What do you think they want to happen after you graduate from college?
Do a good job and take care of them.
They want you to get a job, and they want you to not do what? Mason, you had to go there. Okay, certainly they don't want you to be dealing drugs. What else do they want you to not be doing, which is a pretty common thing that students do after college?
Not use your degree.
Well, they
I
they
want you
would-
to move back in with them.
they don't want you to move back in with them.
My parents really do want me to move back in with them.
Well, it's because you're super nice and you know a lot about how libraries work. So that's probably why. But for Mason and Avery and myself, they want you to move out, get your own job, and lead your own life because they might want to get on with their own lives as well, rather than having you live in the basement until you're 35. But if you graduate and you don't have a job to go to and you don't have any money coming in, you might want to go back home and live in the basement. And so in this case, you want to go home and live with your parents because they can provide you food, they can provide you gas money, they can provide you all of the things that you need to do to live, but they really don't want to do that. And they probably don't want to do that for a variety of reasons. One, it's just a continuing financial drain down of their finances and their savings. But the other thing is they want you to go out and become an independent human being and cut the cord and cut the ties and go off and be who you're destined to be. But this can be a conflict when a student graduates, doesn't have a job, wants to move back home, and the parents don't want them to move back home. And this leads to family conflicts because the recent college graduate wants the parents to continue providing parental care, and the parents don't. They're like, we're done. We've done our deal. You graduated college. We paid all that tuition, and we're out. We're done. This is one form of family conflict. And when we think about this not in the human context, we can think about it with reference to animals. There comes a point where a pair of birds are feeding their offspring, and then it's time for those offspring to fledge. And usually fledging, which is the point at which the baby bird has grown in its flight feathers and has learned to fly so that it can now literally leave the nest and fend for itself, that's usually at the point where a bird parent is going to say, okay, we did our job. We fed you. We protected you from predators. We taught you, in some cases, we taught you how to fly. Now you can fly. So fly away. But of course, if the offspring doesn't want to fly away and the offspring wants to sit around at the nest, what might the parents do? They might push them out, but they also might they might neglect it. Man, Mason is dark today. They might just take care of it longer. And so you butt up against this desire for the offspring to want continued parental care beyond a point which the parent wants to provide that parental care, and that leads to conflict, which then leads to neglect and the parents kicking the bird out of the nest, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is one form of conflict, but it's not the only form of conflict. So we can have conflict. We've already talked about conflict between parents. Sexual conflict involves males and females disagreeing on whatever it happens to be. In some cases, it might be in the context of sexual selection where a female parent wants the male parent to stick around and provide parental care. And of course, what the male parent wants to do is go and spread his gametes around to as many females as possible. So that's sexual conflict through sexual selection happening. But you can also have these conflicts over parental care. You can also have conflicts among siblings where siblings are competing for the resources that parents have. Back in evolution and ecology, and I realize that's ages ago for you guys, but the first case study that we talked about in that class was about the coot chicks that have the bright colors. And what the researchers in that study found was that the brighter coots get more attention from the parents. They get fed more often. As a result, they survive better, they grow faster, et cetera, et cetera. And so there can be competition among siblings for the parental care attentions of the parents. And then, of course, the conflict that I introduced here at the beginning is this conflict between parents and offspring. Offspring want more parental care than the parents are perhaps prepared to provide, and so that also is one type of conflict. So your book has this figure that basically is a diagram of the different types of conflict. Sexual conflict between the male and female parents, sibling conflict or sibling rivalry between the offspring, and then parent-offspring conflict where the goals of the parent conflict with the goals of the offspring. And these are kind of the three categories that then this chapter of the book sort of works through. All right. Questions about that? If you are from a family, you have perhaps seen all of these. Oh, and I have a picture of the coots. I forgot about the coots. This would be an example of sibling conflict. So, out there in the animal world, we can think about the diversity of organisms and whether or not parental care is provided. And then once parental care is provided, there's the issue of who's doing the providing. So probably the most common form of parental care is no parental care. This happens with tons of insects, it happens with turtles, it happens with all kinds of organisms. This is by far the default. Just get the eggs out there in the world, get them fertilized, and then walk away. One of the nice things about this is you don't invest anything more than what you invested in creating the gametes. But of course, what's the downside of that? You've invested no more in your offspring than the cost of creating the gametes. Yeah, this is probably a situation in which offspring survival is really low. And so you should expect this to happen in species that produce large numbers of very small gametes that then produce large numbers of very small offspring, which then mostly die. And so it's kind of a numbers game. Yeah. Sea turtles, they do produce a lot of eggs, although those eggs are pretty chunky, but I'm thinking mainly of insects in this case.
But don't they like come on the beach and like it's like don't make it to like the ocean?
Yeah, so they bury them. So sea turtles, they lay their, since Avery brought it up, sea turtles, they come out of the ocean, they lay their eggs, they've had sex in the ocean with the male. The females come out of the ocean, they lay their eggs in a pit that they dig out on the beach, and then they cover up the eggs with the sand, and then they try and disguise by walking around where the eggs are at, trying to disguise the fact that they dug up a portion of the beach, and then they go back into the ocean and they just leave their eggs there. And then after the eggs are there, they are incubating, but while they're incubating, all sorts of scavengers come along on the beach and try and dig those up. Humans will dig them up and take them back and eat them. And so they're prone to predation because they're not protected. The female's not engaging in any parental care. And then when the eggs hatch, the little baby turtles, they dig their way out of the pit, and then they hit the beach and they run for the surf. And that period of time when they're going from the nest to the surf is once again another one of these time periods where they're really prone to predation, because it's obvious to any passing bird, oh, that's a line of turtles going to the ocean. I think I'll go and have a snack. And so once they get to the ocean, then they're going to be much better off. But even then, they spend a lot of time at relatively small size, where they're prone to all sorts of predation in the ocean. Sea turtles are, in many cases, endangered or threatened species, and there are head starting programs in coastal areas where they will actually mark nests. You patrol the beach, and people who are patrolling the beach, they mark the nest, they put cages around the nest, and they wait for the nest to hatch and the baby turtles to emerge. In some cases, what they do is they just help the baby turtles get to the surf without being killed by predators. But in some cases, they'll actually bring these baby turtles into a facility and they'll rear them. They'll feed them whatever it is that that particular species of turtle eats until they get big enough that their survival in the open ocean is more guaranteed than when they're just little babies. And so when they're the size of a $50, their survival isn't very big. When they're very good, when they're the size of a dinner plate, their survival is much better. So they get them up to about dinner plate size or platter size, and then they release them into the ocean. I was in Trinidad, which is an island off the coast of South America, northern South America, off the coast of Venezuela. And I got the opportunity to go out and be with a group of people who were patrolling the beach for leatherback sea turtles that were coming onto the beach to breed. And we saw a couple of leatherbacks digging out their nests and laying their eggs. So yes, the consequence of no parental care is you have very low survival. But I was actually thinking of insects. So a sea turtle, because they're very large, might produce a couple of hundred eggs. Insects sometimes produce thousands of eggs that they lay, and then those thousands of eggs, they're very, very tiny. They produce very, very tiny offspring, and most of those offspring just die. Corals are another group of animals that do this. They produce tremendous numbers of really small propagules, most of which end up getting killed and eaten, or just dying because of environmental factors. This is what we refer to when if you've ever heard the term R selection versus K selection. Have you guys been exposed to these terms in a class? I know we mentioned it just briefly in evolution and ecology, but once again, that was ages ago. I'm going to draw two graphs up here. So this is a standard population growth graph where you have population size from 0 individuals to a lot and how that changes over time. These population growth graphs can take one of two forms. What are they? Once again, I know you have seen this because I introduced you to this, or Dr. Judd introduced you to this. Did you have Dr. Judd for evolution and ecology? Okay. I lose track of the years after a while. Okay. He has always taught this material. So if you don't retain it, it's his fault. I'll give you one of them. It starts out low and increases and increases and increases and just keeps increasing forever. Do you remember what this form of population growth is? It's exponential growth. What's another term for it? Is it density dependent or density independent growth? Density independent, because the population doesn't slow down as it gets more dense. Independent. Helps if we know how to spell. So the way we write an equation for this is it's the change in population over change in time is equal to R times N. What is R in this case? N is obviously the population size. What is R? Repeat what you said? It's not time. Time is here. This is the change in population size given some change in time. Do you guys remember the intrinsic rate of increase? This is the growth rate. The rate at which this population is growing is constant over time. What makes this thing go up ever steeper is that growth rate is applied to a bigger and bigger population over time. So if you produce a lot of offspring, this is oftentimes going to be really, really high because you're producing lots of offspring. So the jump in the change from one time period to another has a potential to get really large because you are producing lots of offspring. And the more time goes on, the more this increase changes because you're now applying R to a really big population size, whereas here you're applying R to a small population size. Okay, so when we talk about R selected species, we're talking about species who have a reproductive pattern that kind of takes advantage of this density independent type of growth. They're species that are not limited by their environment very much. They really are just limited by how many offspring they put out into the world. And oftentimes we see this in insects, and when we see insect population dynamics, oftentimes what we see is they increase radically and then they crash, and then they increase and crash and increase and crash, increase and crash. This boom and bust pattern of population growth is really common in these R-selected species because they produce so many offspring that oftentimes they manage to overshoot carrying capacity. So this brings us then to K selection. What does K stand for? It's on the board over there. What? It's carrying capacity. What happens to this graph when we add carrying capacity in? Yeah, it will grow in what looks like kind of exponential growth, but then as you get close to whatever carrying capacity is, the growth begins to level out, and it should level out at carrying capacity. This is generally what we see in species that are limited by their environment in terms of their reproduction. This is what we refer to as density-dependent population growth. And density-dependent population growth just basically says that the growth rate, the rate at which this population is changing, is due to their intrinsic reproductive output multiplied times the density, but as the density gets larger, it eats into this. So we take what it would be if it was experiencing density independent growth, and then we reduce it by some factor that is due to the influence of the fact that you now have this many individuals eating up this much of the carrying capacity. So remember that K is expressed in population size terms. So this would be, maybe you have an R of 0.3, and if you have 10 individuals and you have carrying capacity of 100, this thing works out to 0.9. So you're not going to be growing as fast as you would if you weren't being limited by your carrying capacity, but you're growing at 90% of what you would be growing at if you weren't limited by your carrying capacity. If, on the other hand, you now have 90 individuals in your population, you're much closer to carrying capacity. These 90 individuals are using up the resources because you're close to your carrying capacity. Now you only have 10% of your growth that you would be having if you were not being restricted by the environment. So K selection represents the type of selection that occurs in these species where the population growth rate is oftentimes limited by the environment. If your population is limited by your environment, would it be more important or less important for you to exercise parental care? more important for you to exercise parental care because your offspring need whatever the resources are, and so your offspring will have better survival if you provide that. So when we have organisms that exercise parental care, they do things like yolking eggs, making larger eggs. They build nests. They protect their young after they've been hatched or been birthed. And they put more energy into the success and survival of their offspring because they have a population growth model that basically limits the population growth of the population by the limits of resource availability in the environment. And this is what we would generally see in case-selected species. So species that do this, and the example that I gave you were insects, tend to not provide parental care. Species that do this will be more prone to provide parental care in one way or another. So it's just a general way of thinking about which kinds of species are going to be providing parental care. So once you know that parental care is being provided, you can ask yourself, well, who provides the parental care? Your choices are relatively limited. Either the female provides it and the male doesn't. This is what happens in most mammals. The male provides it and the female doesn't. This happens a lot in fishes, and we've already talked a little bit about why this is the case. And then there's biparental care, where both parents are going to be providing parental care. And this is the situation in most birds. So let's put on our thinking caps for a minute. We have this pattern where certain taxonomic groups exhibit different ways of going about providing parental care. Why might this be the pattern that we see? Why in mammals does the female parent provide the parental care? Because they usually what?
They have to carry the offspring, so they have a lot of investment.
So they have a lot of investment at the beginning because they go through gestation. What else about the reproductive system of mammals would encourage females to provide parental care and not males? Yeah, they have to feed. So one of the things about being a mammal is females have mammary glands that produce milk, and that's how you provision the young offspring. And so in this case, females are kind of forced to be with those offspring for a long period of time because they go through the gestation process. So there's a long association with the offspring while they're being gestated. And then you have this early developmental phase where the only member of the species who can provide food to the offspring is the female. So it's really easy to see why most mammals have this type of parental care. Fishes. Plenty of fishes don't provide parental care at all, but when fishes do provide parental care, it's mostly males that do it. Why is that the case? Okay, so in this case, fertilization is external. The females squirt out the eggs, and then the males squirt their sperm over them. If the male leaves those offspring, what happens? Another male comes along and squirts his sperm on it, and then another, and then another, and then another. So the only way that the male can assure his paternity is by staying there and watching those eggs, guarding those eggs, keeping other males away. We've talked about sexual selection. If you are a male and you have hollowed out a nest and you have enticed one female to come in and add all of her little tiny eggs into your nest, and now you're the big male fish there, you are protecting these eggs. When another female comes along and she looks at your nest, what might she think? It's actually a form of sexual selection in fishes. We didn't talk about it when we were talking about fishes during sexual selection. chapter, but this actually does happen. It's kind of cool. Female comes along. She has the big smoochy lips. She has eyes with long eyelashes. She comes along, sees this male, sees that he has a nest and it has eggs in it. What might she do? Wow, he has a nest. He's able to defend that nest. Not only that, somebody else put her eggs in his nest. He must be the bee's knees, so what's she going to do? I'll put my eggs in your nest. Yeah. More eggs come into the nest from another female fish. He squirts his sperm on top of those. Now other females coming by are like, you've got a nest. You're holding on to that nest, and that nest has quite a few eggs in it. You seem like you are a high quality male because you've got lots of eggs and you're holding on to those eggs. You're driving away all the males that are trying to sneak in and fertilize those eggs. I think I'll mate with you too. So not only the assurance of paternity is important in male fishes staying around to care for the eggs, but also the presence of eggs in the male's nest can actually enhance his fitness by attracting other females to the male's nest. You got eggs? I'll add my eggs to that. You have a lot of eggs? I'll definitely add my eggs to that. So the nest itself becomes a sexual signal to females that you are a high quality male. Why are you a high quality male? Well, simply because you convince other females to lay their eggs in your nest. So there are lots of reasons why males will stick around and provide parental care. Why do birds tend to provide biparental care? Once these offspring hatch out, though, what does the male do? See ya. Got you there. You're on your own. You're done with college. We're booting you out of the house. Why do birds tend to provide biparental care? You ever seen a family of birds, two parents feeding a brood of chicks? What are the birds constantly doing? Oh my gosh. Fly away, come back with food, stuff it in the mouths. Chirp, 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 chirp. Fly away, get more food, stuff it in the mouths. Chirp, 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 chirp. Fly away, get more food, stuff it in the mouths. Why do birds have to provide parental care? It takes two of them because birds are little metabolic monsters. They have high metabolic rates, and it takes a lot of energy to get those individuals to fledgling size, and oftentimes the only way to achieve that is if you have two individuals provisioning them. One individual to go and get food while the other one guards the nest. Then the one that went and got food stays and feeds those guys while the other one goes and gets food. The one that just fed stays there and guards the nest until the other one gets back, and you just rotate through it because they are little metabolic engines and you have to be constantly feeding the engine. The question of whether or not parental care is provided and who does the providing has a lot to do with the biology of the organism that you're thinking about. And these are ways in which you can think about that productively. We will continue there on... No, we won't continue there on Friday because we're going to be talking about McClintock and Ewitts on Friday. Mason, your grade is at the top of the last page. And you have a grading rubric for your literature summary. And that, as they say, is that. If you have any questions, let me know. Literature summaries are generally, I think, on the better side this time. I think you're just getting back in the habit of writing those again. And the tests, like I said, they were fine. All of you made B's last time. This time we had a mixture of A's and B's, and I said I wanted to see all A's. So next time, I kind of want to just see all A's. I know you guys are capable of doing it. You just have to do it. High grade was a 96. Low grade was an 81 on the test, I think, if I'm recalling correctly. All right, questions? All right, then. I will see you tomorrow, and you guys will let me know if I need to see you tomorrow.